I'm being joined by the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and the Regional Director for Asia and Pacific at the UNDP, Kanni Wignaraja. Many thanks, Kanni Wignaraja, for speaking with NDTV. My first question to you is with regards to the disengagement that we're seeing in Eastern Ladakh between India and China. As the Assistant UNSG and also with emphasis in the region, how do you view this development?
Thanks, Maha. It's good to join you. And let me say that, these are the two big players on all things development in the Asia Pacific. So I would say from the get-go that without India and China, this region is not going to reach any of the SDGs or most of the COP targets for that matter. So therefore, to me, the essential part of it is what is it and what can the UN and UNDP do to ensure that with both India and China, that we facilitate those points of collaboration and cooperation and reduce any points of friction and competition. Whether that be in trade, whether that's looking at how to come together to protect biodiversity, including in shared areas like the mountain ranges and water resources, whether that's looking at climate mitigation issues or heightened use of renewable energy. This is the make or break is going to be how India and China change their economies around and then also promote a lot of this in the region. I think there's a lot that could be learned from each other. There are strengths and gaps that if one looks at these two big giants, whether that's related to geography or demography or systems and institutions, it really, I think there's a constant seeing how the other is managing certain policies, access to very large populations. And there's a lot there where I see us getting involved as well. And I would maybe close on this one by saying at the end of the day, the way domestic resources are used in both these countries, but for development and really bringing the bottom up. But as importantly, how these countries then use their financial strength, their economic strength, to work with new financing instruments for particularly for low income and other middle income countries, that's going to be critical, including to spread technology.
Now, you spoke about the SDGs. You were in India recently, and there were discussions around financing as well. Now, India's finance minister has said that there is a gap of $3 trillion as far as meeting SDGs by the developing countries is concerned. How will the UN help navigate this critical financial gap?
Yes, already the mind boggles at the idea that this is trillions of dollars. I mean, this cannot come from public sector finance alone. In fact, much of it will have to be carried by the global capital markets and the domestic and international private sector. So it's so important, and this is where the UN and UNDP comes in, that we work with governments, but also to urge private sector to actually direct the financing towards the SDGs. And that's where good trade policy, robust growing of capable institutions that will attract FDI, and then moving capital, both domestic capital and also foreign capital, leveraging ODA and climate financing to the SDGs is going to be so key. So you need good development policy that stays the course, because these can't be 1, 2 year, 3 year policies. Money doesn't flow behind things that move constantly, and certainly not behind the development results that are needed. I would say the biggest issue here would be for developing countries is to bring down the cost of borrowing. This is today is just phenomenal, and for most developing countries, certainly if I look at the Asia Pacific region, if you remove the big players out, it's the cost of borrowing is impossible. If you're a middle income country and you're borrowing at 15, 16, 20%, even from the international financing institutions, forget the borrowing from private capital markets. This you can't bear the cost of this. It's not sustainable, and that's why we're seeing so many countries getting so knee deep in debt and then even defaulting, as some of them have. So that's on the borrowing side. On the revenue side, that is the other key piece of how do we support countries to increase their development revenues, whether that's through tax, through trade, through incentives that bring up a lot of the products and services that they offer. And then remittances have become a big source of revenue for our countries, as has tourism, for example. These are critical areas. And finally, I would say, and learning from India, the fact that India is using localized SDG data to show where the gaps are. And then with UNDP, we've supported that local SDG data, but used it also to put together SDG investor maps, and where then investors, international and local, can come in and put in their money. So these maybe are some ways in which one can look at how to move the gradual millions, billions, and then the $1 trillion to where it's needed most.
I'm curious to know then, is financing the main reason then why we are seeing a stagnation in the SDGs that many of the developing countries are reporting, or are there other factors involved as well?
Finance does play a big role, but I don't think we can say it's all finance. Policies, the choice of policies play a big role. And there are countries that have just had bad policy over decades that haven't actually supported human development, that haven't supported sustainability. So you do see that countries that are looking at policies, investments that move to, let's say, greener economies, right? The decarbonizing economies, and showing that you can have actually a healthy growth rate while you simultaneously create more jobs for people in green industry, as an example, or that you can move to renewables that are actually more cost effective and are better for people and the planet at the same time. Now, it's very different in each context, so you can't compare the big countries or even the landlocked countries, let's say, with the small island states, right, that have a very different set of issues that they have to deal with. But even there, revenue generating industries and services is something that has to be not just for the wealthy few. It has to be more broad-based. I just visited the Maldives, and they're looking across the multiple atolls. How do you create viable services, industry, agriculture, and then trade both among the atolls, but then also with the rest of the region. A good lesson we've learned is that we should not talk about climate goals separately. We should look at climate and nature goals with the valuation of these assets. Because, all our countries sit on an amazing wealth of natural assets, which we've not fully valued and put a value on them, which then we can use either in terms of protecting and promoting conservation and good management of these assets, but sometimes even putting them up as value for swapping out debt, right? So because a lot of these assets, whether they are forests or mountains, mangroves, swamplands, and particularly reefs, the protection of these are not just for a country. These are for the world. And these countries should be getting a better deal, being able to either swap out their debt or certainly get reduced rates of borrowing because they're highly vulnerable, yet they are protecting these assets on behalf of the world and certainly should have better access to better terms of financing to do so.
My final question, you were in the Northeast and there was a discussion around disaster management with climate change. How critical is this, especially for India's Northeast?
It was my first visit to the Northeast. Visited India and many parts of India many times, but it was fascinating to be. I was in Assam and Meghalaya, mostly spent most time in Meghalaya. But related to climate change and managing natural disasters, the Northeast region is particularly vulnerable. In fact, if you look across India, I think it's Assam and Mizoram that are in that top tier of most vulnerable to very fragile ecosystems, natural disasters. And these are, in fact, Assam, I think, is at the top. And at the same time, these are the very same regions where people's livelihoods are so deeply tied to nature, whether that's to the forests, whether that's agriculture on hills, and in very eco-fragile zones. So you've got that on the one side, and on the other side, these are the regions deeply forested that are crucial carbon sinks. Again, not just for the Northeast, for all of India, and I would say for that larger geographic neighborhood, including all of its neighbors. So the Northeast has the highest forest cover, and this needs to be protected. But at the same time, how do you then say, well, the next generation also needs jobs? Current generation needs decent jobs. So it's a matter of looking with government, with private sector, with those communities at saying, how do we make sure that we walk on both feet, protecting and managing these valuable resources, at the same time generating jobs and looking maybe at pathways that are more to do with renewables, to do with digital services, to do with using nature's assets carefully, but using them, in fact, to leverage these new industries that are greener. It is quite something that a very hard to abate sector like construction and transport can actually go green if we switch out of fossil fuels and current construction methods. I mean, just as a small side example, to me, it was remarkable to see what communities were doing in building and weaving these living root bridges and which allow you through the rainforest to actually move from village to village. And these ficus trees withstand the harshest storms. You can put a monsoon through it, and still they don't collapse like other bridges do. And that's one just small example, but it is an intergenerational example that we can, for example, have mobility and at the same time protect and use our environment differently. So my coming out of there, it only reinforced an idea and a position that UNDP has always taken, which is you can't address persistent, intense natural disasters only with constant relief efforts. Hugely expensive to do this. You've got to look at a recovery that is more sustainable going forward. And you've got to work with businesses, with local government, with communities to see how prevention has more investment coming in, and that both jobs and infrastructure actually can withstand that they need to be built to last and can withstand all kinds of quakes and storms, literally and metaphorically.
Many thanks, Kanni Wignaraja, for speaking with NDTV.
Thank you, Maha. Good to talk to you.